Last week, with Jerry Jeudy returning to the lineup, Cortland Sutton saw just 4 targets. Is this something that we should be concerned about going forward? Rich, start us off. How are we feeling about Cortland Sutton, not only for this matchup, but just for the rest of the season with Jerry Jeudy back?
Well, I still like him a lot in this matchup, but what we've seen is basically the volatility we're going to have when the Denver Broncos get to play with positive game script. That's really the story that we're going to see. You've got a lot of viable targets on a team that inherently doesn't want to throw the football when they don't have to, and that's what we ran into last week with a team that nursed the 17 to 10 win. But in the 2 games that Denver has allowed 24 or more points, and the Cowboys are sitting on a 29-point implied team total. Teddy Bridgewater has had to throw the ball 38 and 49 times. So I do feel good this week, a little bit of flop lag for Cortland Sutton in this matchup in terms of having just Denver have to press the scoreboard and have to be pressed into passing volume. But anytime the Denver is a favorite or in these games that can be kind of, a slugfest, the actual overall raw volume target count is not going to really be there and force him to kind of land one of these home run balls to get over.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it is frustrating having such a conservative coach on a team filled with just these like firepower athletes with Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Noah Fant. You want to see them airing it out a little bit, but that's just not what Vic Fangio's going to do. If he doesn't have to throw the ball, like you said, he is not going to. Tommy, how are you feeling? Whether you want to talk about this matchup or for the rest of the season, how should we be looking at Cortland Sutton right now?
I would be a little bit worried now that Judy's back, but I mean, the real issue, I think, too, besides all the great points that Rich made, is just that the quarterback is Teddy Bridgewater, so it's always going to be limited. The upside's always going to be capped, and that's really the real issue. Those guys are phenomenal athletes, great players. I love them both. But I'm actually a bigger fan of their running game and the running backs they have there. But I wouldn't be too worried. I think, when you get a new guy back, you want to kind of feed him the ball a little bit, and things kind of overcorrect. And so you might see it come back a little bit to more balance between the two guys.
I like that. And we will talk about the running game in just a second because, Melvin Gordon made it unscathed through the trade deadline, which isn't what people wanted to see, but, we got to adjust our rankings from here. So we will talk about that in just a bit. But before that, I want to get into some introductions. I'm joined on the top right with Rich Hribar. So happy that we finally get a chance to connect. I've been a big fan of your work for a long, long time. I know you're over at Sharp Football Analysis, but you are everywhere, man. I see you on different podcasts and live streams all over the place. So why don't you let everyone know what you got going on right now, some things that you're working on this week, and where they can find you over on social media.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to, do a podcast with both of you guys I followed for a while, and we haven't had a chance to do anything together. So I always love doing stuff with new people. And yeah, I'm just out there trying to, kind of, spread the word about fantasy football, just like everybody else. So I do the weekly worksheet every week where I break down all the games and all the players, and that comes up, throughout the day on Tuesday, and I usually tweet it out on Wednesday. But I start writing up all these games and players on Tuesdays, and then I just go on as many shows as possible and talk about things throughout the week. So here we are this week, and it was an actual halfway point of the NFL season, which seems weird for week 9, but with 18 weeks, this is the official halfway point.
Yeah, this being my first season, like really invested full-time in the industry, it's almost a little bittersweet because the season is just going by like this. Like it is going by quick. And honestly, I am blown away, Rich, that you start that article on Tuesday. With how in-depth that is, I assume that by halftime on the early games on Sunday, you were already starting at it. That is unbelievable that you can crank that out that quickly. But my other guest down at the bottom, we got Tommy here over at the Undroppables, also at 2on1 Fantasy Sports. Why don't you let everyone know what you're working on, Tommy, and where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, and thanks for having me on, Dave. 2on1 FFB, as it says right in my name right there, on Twitter, and Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, kind of everywhere on social media, just trying to get the content out there, get the Undroppables name and face in front of as many people as possible. But yeah, we have a great team over there, writing, putting out rankings, content every week, start-sit articles, waiver wire stuff, and then doing some writing for Downtown Rams as well, just covering the Rams from a defensive perspective. I write a weekly column over there about the defensive game plan for the week, and I kind of look at the other team that they're going up against. So that's been a lot of fun for me this year to do that, do a little bit more football writing and a little bit less fantasy. Fantasy is my passion, but football, that's my heart and soul. Everything's been about football. So that's kind of what got me into the space, talking football. And now I'm here talking with you, Dave and Rich, and excited to be here.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of games to talk about. What we'll do is cover some of the big games for the week, and then we will finish with the Thursday night football matchup that kicks off in just a few hours. But let's go back. We talked about Denver a little bit, and we talked about the Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, but there's another frustrating timeshare there, and that is Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams. So many people wanted to see Melvin Gordon get traded at the deadline, but he is staying in Denver. So Rich, I'll ask you this question first. Is there any chance that Melvin Gordon takes over this season, or are we just going to see this, pretty unpredictable 50-50 split through the rest of the year?
They're still, in the range of outcomes, that the last quarter of the season, or the Broncos are out of it, or, any injury happens, there's still an opportunity there. Like Javonte Williams is still a guy I would lean towards, a positive end of the spectrum on. I'd want him on my rosters unless he's a guy that I could package up and get something that I really want on my rosters. I would do that as well. But there's really no reason for the Broncos to go away from this because Javonte Williams is turning in splash runs, but Melvin Gordon has been the more effective down-to-down player. He's been better in pass protection. He has a far less, of his runs, get stuffed at the line of scrimmage. And he's used in the red zone. So, I mean, all these things kind of like add up to where like Melvin Gordon, as much as we want Javonte Williams to be the guy, Melvin Gordon also isn't giving us a reason to really get benched yet either, because he's been more effective on a lot of things that coaches hold a lot of value in place on the real football field. Like I said, pass protection and getting positive yardage, not negative runs, things like that are always going to carry weight, especially a guy like Vic Fangio. Like he's going to stock a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, you could tell that he is a big Melvin Gordon fan. He's had nothing but great things to say about him. And I think what you kind of alluded to a little bit is what's frustrating is that they're splitting targets and red zones. Melvin Gordon's getting the red zone work. Javonte Williams is getting the targets. And that's what makes it kind of unpredictable week to week. You've got other timeshares like, in Detroit where all of those premium touches are going to DeAndre Swift, which is, great for fantasy football because that's the guy you want to rely on week in and week out. But with the targets and the red zone touches going to separate players, it does make it a little bit unpredictable. But I want to talk about the other side of the ball here, which is Dallas. They have missed Michael Gallup since the beginning of the season pretty much, and it looks like he's eyeing a return. I actually saw him in a press conference yesterday saying that he is expecting to suit up this week. So, Tommy, if Michael Gallup is active with no limitations this week, how high are you comfortable ranking him? Is he somebody that you're plugging in as a wide receiver 3 like you drafted him for, or are you kind of stashing him on your bench just to see how this week plays out?
Yeah, me personally, I'm the kind of fantasy player that when someone's coming back, I have a really hard time starting them. I kind of want to see how they're going to be for a week. Sometimes that bites you in the butt, they go off and you're just like, okay, damn. But it's hard because again, another team that has a great wealth of talent, CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper, you're going to give those guys the targets. They're going to be there. And so already, even before he was getting hurt, I mean, the first game wasn't great for Gallup. And it's a super small sample size to go off of to see how he's going to be this year. But it wasn't great. And just seeing the competition that he has on his own team, I really wouldn't feel comfortable starting him unless I had to. And that would be at most in a flex spot. And again, if you're on buys and injuries that are really hampering your team, that's the only place I'd really consider starting him. But yeah, I would have him. I think I have him ranked as as a high-end wide receiver 3, and that's hopeful. I really don't expect a whole lot from him this week, but I've definitely been wrong before.
Yeah, it's really tough to trust Michael Gallup just knowing how many weapons they have on that offense. That being said, in Dynasty, Michael Gallup is probably my favorite target out there right now. I think that he is going to get paid very handsomely this offseason, be the wide receiver 1 somewhere, and that's what I'm holding on to hope for. But the last situation that I want to talk about in this game is the backfield for Dallas. So, Rich, I'll throw this question to you. But Tony Pollard has been pretty inconsistent. And, there were talks in the offseason that he might even take over Ezekiel Elliott. I won't talk about that too much, but what we're seeing right now is that Ezekiel Elliott has wound back the clock. He is looking like an elite running back again. So what are we supposed to do with Tony Pollard this week? Is this one where you're expecting that he could have a big week like he did earlier in the season, or are you just keeping him stashed on your bench as well?
Yeah, he's more or less still in handcuff mode, but we've got a pretty clear indication that if the Cowboys are going to be in positive game script, he's going to be involved. And when they're in negative game script, it's going to be all Ezekiel Elliott. The Cowboys have really only had 2 games where they've trailed, consistently throughout both games. That's the Tampa Bay game, and it was on Sunday night. And when we saw them trail on Sunday night, Ezekiel Elliott played a season high. He had a season high 71.4% of the backfield touches. And then we see Tony Pollard kind of fall, by the wayside. But when they're able to kind of keep this combo back thing going and control game script and not have to really put the ball in the air like they did weeks 2 through 5, Tony Pollard's involved in the offense as kind of a counterpunch guy, but we're still not a guy that's going to soak up like really any of the money touches, the green zone touches, which is what kind of, we don't want to really chase. He's more of a floor play, of a flex if you got to break the glass because you're just out of bodies, that type of player. But with them playing Denver as huge home favorites, I would expect his touch count to kind of go back to where it was weeks 2 through 5 in this matchup.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think this is a game where, of all the games we're going to discuss, this probably has the most predictable game script. With a healthy Dak, with Gallup back there, you expect Dallas to take an early lead here. So even though some of these guys have been kind of inconsistent, you can sort of estimate how this game is going to go. Let's switch to another game, though, and this one is just full of firepower. We got the Los Angeles Chargers playing in Philadelphia against the Eagles. And Rich, I'll start with you on this question. Darius Slay has been pretty good. Again, he's just been doing this for years now. He's been, I don't know if I'd put him in shutdown territory, but he has been a very good cornerback. So do you expect him to be on Mike Williams or Keenan Allen in this matchup? And is that affecting your rankings and projections at all, worrying about that Darius Slay effect?
Well, you look at the Eagles; they play a ton of zone. Jonathan Gannon coming under from Matt Eberflus. But they've started to incorporate Darius Slay as to shadowing some cornerbacks. They didn't shadow anyone in Detroit, but the week before that he shadowed Henry Ruggs, and the week before that he shadowed Mike Evans. So we have seen Mike Williams be a little bit sensitive to matchup so far now that we have 8-week sample to kind of look back on, and they had a bye mixed in there. But you look at his good games, they came against Washington, Dallas, Kansas City, and Cleveland, teams that have struggled to stop really anybody through the air, and especially, top boundary receivers. And then his down weeks have come against, the Raiders, and Case Hayward's played well, and they're not giving up anything downfield. Then last week against the Patriots, who are number 3 in point slot opposing boundary receivers, and then he played hurt that game against Baltimore, basically when the offense was kind of nuked. So when you look at the Eagles in general, they're not giving up really anything downfield in terms of passing. Therefore, they have the lowest depth of target faced in the NFL. They play just a lot of, both these teams really they're designed to funnel targets to the tight ends and the backs, come up, make tackles. Same thing in the run game, come up and make your run fits. They don't want to give up, short drives. They want teams to kind of bleed them nickel and dime, have to just force them into making a mistake at some point. So I would lean towards it being towards like more of the volatile Mike Williams weeks and more of a Keenan Allen type game between the two guys. Probably see some Jared Cook and Austin Eckler, really kind of the guys getting the most matchup benefits. But yeah, I would think when you're looking at Mike Williams, a lot of people are saying, well, what do we really have? And I think now that we're starting to get this mold of the season kind of taking shape, we're seeing him being a little bit sensitive to these types of matchups. Now, he still is a guy that can catch 1 or 2 targets and get there for you, but I think it makes him more of like a volatile wide receiver too than that set and forget alpha receiver that he was kind of trending towards that first month of the year.
And that's something that really surprised me. I just saw this weeks 1, 2, and 3. He was seeing, just historically for him, a very low ADOT where they were using him in a different role. And then after having those great 3 weeks to start the season, then they started running him downfield again, and his ADOT jumped to over 15. So I'm kind of concerned when they had something that was working so well with Mike Williams, why they reverted back to the role that he has played for the previous 4 years. So I'm still kind of trying to wrap my head around that, because it seems like the utilization for Mike Williams has changed drastically. But like you said, this is an Eagles defense that really doesn't give up a lot of big shots. So, Tommy, the question I've got for you, and Rich already talked about this a little bit, but do you think Jared Cook could be a decent streaming option this week? It seems like this is a team that does give up a lot of those short passes across the middle. So could you see this being a week where Jared Cook might see 7, 8, 9 targets?
Yeah, short answer, definitely. Real quick to go back on that Darius Slay thing, though. One thing I was looking at is Slay plays mostly outside, and Keenan Allen has the 10th most snaps in the slot with like 51%, 51.5%. So like over half the time he's playing in the slot. So that alone, I just think, Slay is going to be outside on Williams, and Keenan Allen's going to eat. So it's going to be a little bit tougher for Mike this week. But going back to your question about Jared Cook, absolutely. I've been spot starting him in a couple of my dynasty leagues where you have a bunch of flex spots and you need, someone to fill in there. I've been pretty happy with Jared Cook. Philadelphia gives up the 4th most points to tight ends. But it's still, with the tight end position this year, I mean, even with like guys like, George Kittle and even Kelsey, at times it seems like it's a crapshoot. Darren Waller hasn't been the guy that we were hoping he was going to be, that high 2nd round draft pick that we're all going for in like Scott Fishbowl. So it's been tough, and no one's really, fully standing out as the guy that's really taking it away. So at this point, it's like, throw anyone out there sometimes at that tight end position and just see what sticks. But I like Jared Cook this week because of the matchup.
Yeah, and Jared Cook, man, he's just been Mr. Reliable. Didn't have a great start to his career, but it seems like for the last 6 years, he's one of those guys that you could just pick up off the waivers, plug into your lineup, use him whenever you need to. And he doesn't have a huge ceiling, but he's good for a few touchdowns every single year. And I think this is a good matchup for him. Rich, back to you. I want to talk a little bit about Jalen Hurts because he was a QB1 every single week up until last week, which is just crazy to see. So is he just going to bounce back, or do you think that this is a game where the Eagles might lean heavily on the run and try to exploit the Chargers on the ground, which realistically could also benefit Jalen Hurts? What are you expecting from Jalen Hurts this week?
I mean, to be fair, he was a little bit unlucky, but also to be fair, like we had sucked out so much on Jalen Hurts, like through the first 6 weeks that we deserved that one.
Yep.
There's a lot of times he got there when he really shouldn't have. So last week for him to kind of run kind of cold because this is, they scored 40 points. They're in the red zone repeatedly. He has, 2 carries inside the 5 where he gets tackled at the 1 yard line. Jalen Reagor has a jet pass that would have counted as a touchdown pass. That gets overturned and it isn't a touchdown. And they have the 4 rushing touchdowns, which are the first non-kind of game-ball rushing touchdowns that Eagles running backs had all season. So on one hand, he did run unlucky, but we had been running pretty pure on Jalen Hurts the first 6 weeks of the year. So we can't really complain too much. This is an interesting matchup because Jalen Hurts, I would expect him to really struggle throwing the ball again because, the Chargers, they sit back in a lot of zone. Jalen Hurts has really struggled, against zone coverage as opposed to man. He's a guy that wants to let things rip, make a read, see a throw, instead of having to fit things into windows. It's very similar to the matchup he had a couple weeks ago to the Raiders, another team that play, a lot of cover 3, predicated not giving up a lot of deep balls. And he had a second lowest completion rate of the season in that game, just under 7 yards per attempt. So he's probably a game where we're going to need to get there with the legs a little bit with Jalen Hurts. And he's capable of doing it. He still even last week when he, didn't really play like a full game. They dialed down the aggressiveness. He still had 70 rushing yards in that game. So I expect him to be more of like that, the higher floor version that we've seen. Hopefully we don't have to suck out to the fourth quarter like we have, repeatedly again this season. But I see him more of like a higher floor play this week than someone that we'll see be kind of a guy that really crashes a ceiling.
Yeah, just from like an emotional standpoint here, I feel like having Jalen Hurts on your roster this year is just like having Deshaun Watson last year. Because, I had Deshaun Watson a lot last year, had Jalen Hurts a lot this year. And going into the fourth quarter, you're just like, well, this is it. This is the week that he's not going to do it. And then just 20 points out of nowhere in the fourth quarter. So it's definitely fun to see, but very, very stressful. You're riding that roller coaster every single week.
Well, and this is the start of a series of tough matchups for Jalen Hurts too on his schedule. I wrote about him in my last week's trade article to trade for win now teams because he might be in a situation where his value actually drops in the next couple of weeks because these matchups are so tough and people are kind of falling off of like that high that we all were on him early in the season. And it might be a good time to grab him because his schedule lines up greatly for the fantasy playoffs, and then it might all positive matchups right there that might win you the championship.
And let's not even talk about the value ding that came out with a report that Gardner Minshew could start at some time this year. That just made his value plummet as well. Not sure how much I'm buying into that, but definitely something to monitor. But I want to talk about this backfield. Rich, you just talked about it, that they went crazy running the ball, 4 touchdowns last week on the ground. So assuming that the Eagles do commit to the run, which is the best way to take advantage of this Chargers offense, who is the guy this week, Tommy? I have no idea. I mean, Miles Sanders is on IR. Boston Scott got a, just crazy amount of touches last week. Kenneth Gainwell was non-existent until the end of the game. And then I'm pretty sure I read that Jordan Howard is back on the practice squad. So I have no idea what to make of this backfield. Who is the guy to start this week, if any?
I wish I could say Jordan Howard because, like, in my opinion, and it's like people hate me for this take, but in my opinion, I still thought he was always a good running back. It just was like better for real football, terrible for fantasy kind of thing. But we were having this conversation earlier today with the Droppables team because people are wondering, like, do I drop Gainwell to pick up Boston Scott now? Like, what do I do? It's honestly, in my opinion, I think it's a little bit of a toss up. It's hard to say, but I really think Boston Scott has your safer floor, and Gainwell's your higher ceiling guy that might, have some great boom games, might get used in a variety of ways. He's a gadget type of player, and Philadelphia likes to use guys in all sorts of ways sometimes. So he has that potential, especially if he scores, to be really good for fantasy. But if you have to rely on someone, and if you're a guy like me, I like consistency a little bit more. I like a little bit safer floor, especially if I'm starting someone not in a flex spot, like in an RB1 or RB2 spot. And so if that's the case, then I really would go with Boston Scott. He was one of our pickups of the week for waivers this week. I'm not saying that with confident, that you should start Boston Scott, but I like his rushing potential and the fact that he's been with the team a little bit longer than the rookie Gainwell.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. But Rich, I want to ask you the same question because this is one that I have been trying to decipher over the last few days, and I really have no idea, if I'm being frank. Who is the guy in the Eagles that you should be starting in the backfield?
Well, I think that's probably something we'll see to be game script sensitive. If they end up falling, behind here, we could see a lot more Kenneth Gainwell, involved. And if they're able to stay ahead and control game script, then, we'll see Boston Scott, kind of be that guy. Really not going to get a lot of catches probably from Boston Scott. You might get into the end zone here for the money touch. That's the problem here is the way it's compartmentalized is, Gainwell's probably has to score a touchdown from outside of the 5-yard line. And then Boston Scott's not going to catch any passes if they fall behind. The Chargers did come out of the bye a little bit better against the run. We talk about them, having, a guy like Derwin James and those linebackers and those defensive backs have to come and really kind of fill their run fits that they struggled, before the bye. They made at least the Patriots work for it last week. I mean, they only allowed 3.7 yards per carry to the Patriots. They still gave up the 130 rushing yards because they let the Patriots, hang around a neutral game script, but they at least, on 35 carries made them work for it, which they hadn't make anyone work for it prior to the bye. So something to keep in mind, an Eagles team that really doesn't run the ball well, period. Even last week, outside of the Lions, like they really don't run the ball well on anybody. So I don't want to just pencil them in and say like, all right, just because of the matchup, the Chargers giving up rushing points makes Boston Scott a great play. He's still probably more that, that in that flex mold, because obviously he's going to be probably a little game script sensitive and a little touchdown reliant.
Yeah, so this is another one that's pretty inconsistent and tough to gauge, but I agree with both of you. I think that Boston Scott is the guy to play just because of the floor. I think that if either of those running backs is going to stumble into the end zone, Boston Scott's probably a little bit more likely given his role in that offense. Now, there are so many big games this week that are just loaded with fantasy football implications. And this one, Arizona at San Francisco, is another huge game. And I want to start off talking about Deandre Hopkins. Man, he has been one of the most polarizing players right now. You've got like half of the fantasy football industry screaming that he's a buy low. You've got the other half screaming that he's a sell high. Realistically, the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. But, last week he was a toe away from breaking off a huge touchdown, but his usage is down. His targets are down. I mean, his role has just really changed quite a bit in this offense. So, Tommy, where are you ranking him this week? I mean, is he still a low-end wide receiver 1, or are you just pushing him down that a little bit? And this is assuming he's fully healthy. I want to say.
Yeah, right. And I think part of him being not necessarily fully healthy will also kind of push him down a little bit. And so I have him as currently a high-end wide receiver 2. I think our consensus right now, and I think it's just me and Chalk over at the Undroppables that have finished our rankings. Real quick, Jax Falcone, Dino Game Theory, go finish your rankings, please. I know you're watching this show. Stop watching and go finish your rankings. Sorry, I had to give him a little shit there. But yeah, currently a wide receiver 2, a high-end wide receiver 2. His hamstring injury, Kyler has the ankle injury. They're both dealing with. So it's not going to be great. Everyone's not fully healthy. His snap share has been really high. He's had no double-digit targets, no games over 100 yards. He's been touchdown dependent all year, and that's not really like Nuke. That's not his game, is to be a touchdown dependent guy. But he has been this year. And games that he hasn't scored a touchdown, he's had 10 points or less. So if he's not scoring, then he's not really worth starting. And it's not necessarily a fault of his own. I mean, he's definitely getting keyed in on the most as the alpha wide receiver on that team. But Kyler's really spreading the ball around a lot. I mean, a lot of guys are getting a good amount of targets, and Rondale Moore, Christian Kirk, Max Williams. It's just before he got hurt was doing great, and now they got Ertz. So it's he's struggling for like almost not a fault of his own. It's almost not his fault why he's doing so bad, but he is. And so it sucks to say that Nuke right now is touchdown dependent, and that's that's what you have to bank on, but that's what you have to bank on right now.
And the nice thing is he's been finding the end zone. So, I mean, that kind of is his role once they get there. That's who Kyler
Right.
is looking at. But I think, you mentioned the snap counts, and I think those are even a little bit deceiving because he played a lot of snaps last week. But when you saw him, he was lined up on the left side of the field, and you saw him literally hobbling through, like the ball would snap, and he was just limping, and they were just using him as a pure decoy last week.
Yeah.
So, he's one of those guys. I feel like he is just consistently on the injury report and always suits up. So that's why I said assuming full health. But this injury does feel a little bit different because we saw him hobbling around quite a bit last week. Another topic that I want to talk about, though, on this Arizona Cardinals team is the backfield there, similar to what we were talking about with Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams. We've got James Conner, who has been a touchdown machine, and we've got Chase Edmonds, who is seeing the majority of the work, both in the passing game and the ground game. So, Rich, who do you prefer in this matchup? Are you still riding the hot hand with James Conner? Is he just going to keep finding the end zone every single week, or is Edmonds the better play?
I mean, Edmonds is by far the better play for touches and volume, and you just kind of let that, lie where it can, and hopefully you can get into the end zone. He got in the end zone for the first time last week. But I mean, James Conner, 52% of his fantasy points are from touchdowns. Like, he's in full Lendell White mode. Just, if you don't get there, I mean, when these teams played in week 5, he got there, he had just 37 yards. And that's kind of what you're getting from James Conner. He's not going to catch any passes. He's going to be probably, unless the Cardinals are like way ahead, be stuck, like relegated to like 20 to 40 total yards from scrimmage. And you're going to get caught holding the bag one of these weeks when you don't get into the end zone. And maybe it'll be this week. It is a scary week for the Cardinals in general because everyone's hurt. I mean, they're really coming this game banged up, and they're gonna have no AJ Green. Deandre Hopkins, you guys talked about, he's got a hamstring injury, and he's probably never gonna sit. So it's gonna be one of these things every week where he probably should just take a week or two off and then come back. But it's going to be a week-to-week thing now where we're going to have to deal with him either coming out in and out of games. And then Kyler Murray's hurt. I mean, and Kyler, we saw last year when he had the shoulder injury, he's a lot like, that almost like, you take the sports car to the shop, and it's just not, it's just not as pristine. And this is and the 49ers always play the Cardinals good. They played them well in week 5 with Trey Lance, starting. Defensively, they really kind of gave Kyler fits to as well. So without him being healthy, and he might not even practice all week, DeAndre Hopkins being banged up, this could be another one of these games for the Cardinals where they're, floating around 20 points, and it's not a ceiling game where the carnival is coming along for the ride like we had a lot of these moments in the front half of the season. So it does make it tough. Edmonds, I think, is, obviously a safe floor, like, floor-based RB2 and PPR formats, and then like kind of a more of like a fringe RB2 like flex in non-PPR formats, but he's going to get the touches and the catches. And if they don't have to, and if Colt McCoy plays, it could help him, get stack receptions as well. So, but he'd be the guy I think is safe. I guess Connor, the sand in the hourglass is going to thin out on Connor's touchdowns one of these weeks.
Yeah, that's what you'd think, but man, he just keeps getting them. It's crazy. I think he's got 7 touches inside the 5-yard line, and he's converted those into 5 touchdowns. And then, you talked about the Chase Edmonds touchdown last week, but that was him getting the ball from 20 yards out and carving through the entire defense. They just aren't giving him those touches, so it is frustrating to see. But also, I love that analogy about, Kyler being like a sports car that you take to the shop. That is so spot on. And last year, he had that shoulder injury, and then all season we kept saying he's going to bounce back, and he never really did. So that is certainly a fear.
And he already hasn't been running. He hadn't been running before this, so he's definitely not going to run this week.
Yeah, this is a fun team to watch, but you said that these teams always play against each other. Well, I feel like any NFC West matchup this season is just must-watch football. These have just been fantastic games almost every single week when they get a chance to play each other. And I want to talk about San Francisco now. And Tommy, I've just got a simple question for you, man. Eli Mitchell has been one of the best pickups that you can get so far this season. He has 100 yards and a touchdown in 3 of his 5 games this year. So give me one reason that I should not rank Eli Mitchell as an RB1 this week.
My pause is because I'm thinking of a real good reason, because I really can't. I guess the only one thing that makes me a little worried is just that he's questionable to start the week. He didn't practice yesterday. I didn't get the report, or I didn't see it for today if it's already came out. He's questionable with a rib injury. But that's it. That's all I got. I mean, he's our consensus RB11 on the week. Arizona gives up the 26 they give 26 or least amount of points to running back, so it's not great, so it's like it's not a fantastic matchup, but at the same time, I have a hard time pushing him any lower. He's the back end RB1 for this week for me.
Yeah, same question to you, Rich. I mean, is there any reason that we shouldn't? It seems like every week the consensus has him ranked somewhere in like the middling RB2, and he just keeps outperforming that week in and week out. So should we start viewing him as an RB1 going forward?
It's tough because he doesn't have the overall like usage profile. This matchup in particular, it's Arizona doesn't give a lot of points to running backs because they've been so ahead on the scoreboard, but they've been awful against the run the entire season. I mean, they've allowed the highest rate of explosive runs in the NFL, gains of 10 or more yards. It's just that they don't face a lot of attempts because they've been ahead on the scoreboard so much. And who leads the NFL in the rate of explosive runs among running backs? And it's Elijah Mitchell. But he has just 3 touches on third down all season. He's not going to really catch the football. So these games where you don't get a touchdown, like we talked about, with some of the other guys, you're just going to get hollow yardage. And he's a guy that can even have 110 yards or 100 yards rushing. But if he doesn't score a touchdown, you're not getting any catches. And then you have your RB2, right? Just hollow yardage. So that's the only thing. Him being a little nicked up and not really involved in the passing game or third down usage is really what's just holding him back. But if I have him, I feel really comfortable playing him if he's healthy enough to play in this game.
Yeah, and like you said, being a little nicked up, that is just the theme for this game, isn't it? It seems like everybody in this game is just a little bit nicked up.
Yeah, Debo's hurt. Everyone's hurt, man.
Yep. So Debo's hurt, and Tommy, I see you got something to say. What's
up? Because I think Rich had a great point. Earlier when he mentioned about Colt McCoy. If Kyler doesn't play, then the game script kind of changes completely, and you might see a lot more running from San Francisco because they're not having to throw it because they're not coming from behind because Kyler's putting up so many points on them. I think it's really going to depend on who's healthy this week and who's actually going to play.
Speaking of who's healthy, I haven't seen any news today, but last I saw when I put these questions together yesterday, they said George Kittle was possible to return. Have you guys seen any updated news on that? I should have done my due diligence before the show, but I haven't seen any new news on that. So I don't know if George Kittle is coming back this week or if he's just going to come back to practice and hope for it. But we've also got Deebo Samuel banged up a little bit. So if George Kittle is able to make it back this week, Rich, is that something that you're kind of concerned about Deebo Samuel? I mean, he was still putting up numbers in the first couple of weeks when George Kittle was healthy, but do you think that could negatively impact Deebo Samuel and stop him from being just the locked and loaded wide receiver one we've seen?
I mean, there might be a couple target reduction, but we don't expect Deebo Samuel, a guy, to carry like a 35% target share the entire season. So I would expect there to be some reduction in targets, but the way Deebo Samuel is playing this year and the types of targets he's getting are completely different than the types of targets he's gotten to his career at this point, which still carry a lot of high fantasy leverage. So if he's going to keep getting used downfield and, used near the end zone, then you can shave off a few targets and still have a guy that can be in wide receiver one contention. He also has got dealing with a calf injury, so keep tabs on that. I didn't see an update on Kittle because, they're West Coast teams, so I think all that information is kind of coming out now. But I did see that Deebo really wasn't practicing. It was just kind of on the bike today too. So usually Friday is like a telltale sign of what we can expect. If he doesn't practice tomorrow, it would probably be something where you have a lot more trepidation than you would if he's able to, to log a practice. I did see Elijah Mitchell was expected to practice today, so that's positive. Didn't see Kittle, but yeah, I mean, Debo's probably not going to, like I said, lead the NFL in target share, but he's still, the way he's getting used this season is completely different at this point in his career, and I still feel really confident in having him in my lineups.
Yeah. And, we got a lot of injury analysts out there in the fantasy football space, but one that I really like for this situation is Jeff Mueller, who is a 49ers fan. And I just pulled this up on Twitter. He said that he doesn't think Deebo Samuel will play at all this week. He said he's iffy on George Kittle, but he thinks that Kittle is more likely to suit up than Deebo Samuel. So like you said, we'll get some more information on this in just a few hours, but definitely something to keep a close eye on heading into this weekend. I want to talk about one more game. Yeah,
the latest I seen on Kittle on Niners Wire from yesterday, just that he was at practice, and that's about it. That's like the latest news. He's back to practice and looking good, but I agree with you. I would trust Jeff Mueller a lot more than the internet.
Yeah, fingers crossed, because I have had Kittle. I was beating the drum for him this offseason. I said, injury prone, don't worry about it. He's going to be just fine. And I have been struggling through a lot of my leagues, just streaming tight ends week in and week out. All right, well, one
David
more game.
Lombardi just tweeted 2 minutes live that both Elijah Mitchell and George Kittle are practicing today, but no Deebo.
No Deebo. Damn it.
All right. Well, this could be a George Kittle pop week then. If that's what's going to happen, if Deebo is unable to play and George Kittle comes back, I mean, the offense should funnel through him. So we'll see.
And don't forget the impact George Kittle has on the rest of this offense. A guy like Elijah Mitchell, if he's able to play, I mean, they've missed George Kittle, obviously one of the apex run blocking tight ends in the NFL. His whole top down input, it doesn't just go to the passing game.
Yeah, and I called that out actually. I believe it was after week 3, but he is being asked to block more this year than he ever has. Like he has improved so much as a blocker that it's actually hurting his fantasy football output because he's just like they want to use him in that role, and he's not seeing the same usage that he used to in the passing game. But let's talk
You know,
about this Tennessee game. Yeah, okay, all right, all right.
we could talk all
What's
day.
up, Tommy?
Well, even with Kittle there, Debo was averaging like 23 points a game. So it's
Right.
like, if he comes back, I don't think it will affect him that much. But I think everything that Rich is saying about how he affects the other people on the field, I can see that happening.
Yeah, he was the wide receiver 8 when Kittle was there, which is surprising quite a lot of people. And
Listen, breath of fresh air. Robbie Gold will be back.
Oh, I love that. Good as gold. Yeah. So be sure if you're in a league with kickers, that's definitely somebody that you want to pick up this week if he's still available for whatever reason. But can we move on to the Tennessee game now? Can we talk? All right. So Titans at Rams, and obviously the big thing here is no Derrick Henry. That is going to send ripple effects through that entire Tennessee team. That is just a loss that is almost impossible to get over. But the question I have, Adrian Peterson, I think he's still technically on the practice squad, but there have been reports that he should be ready to go this week. So, Rich, who is the better play? Is it Adrian Peterson, Jeremy McNichols, or are you pulling deep here and saying McCall Sargent is the guy to fire up? Who are you most confident in this backfield?
Well, they let Sargent go yesterday and brought
Oh.
Deontay Foreman in as well.
Yes, that's right. I saw that.
But for this particular game and the way the timing of Peterson being signed, the injury, and this potential game script, I would lean on for fantasy period. To play any of these guys would be Jerry McNichols, preferably in full PPR formats. Rams already have a 31-point team total. They have just been boat racing these poor subpar defenses these past month. They faced the Giants, the Lions, last week against the Texans. Now they get this Tennessee defense that's still subpar. We saw them play the Chiefs well, and then right back against the Colts, they were back to giving up tons of yardage and big plays. I'd expect the Rams to score a lot of points in this game at home and kind of make it more of a passing script, which opens door for McNichols. But then when you look big picture, because in terms of should I have picked up Adrian Peterson? The remaining schedule for the Titans is the Saints, the Texans, the Patriots, the Jaguars, the Steelers, the 49ers, and the Dolphins through the fantasy playoffs. And none of those teams, even if the best of those offenses are teams that are to score in the mid-20s, teams that are not going to really pull away like I believe the Rams will on Sunday night or are capable of doing. So it does give a little inkling to say if the Todd Downing and this staff doesn't really want to change the foundation of the principles of what this offense is founded on, that Peterson could still be effective as a goal linebacker guy and get 14 to 16 touches per game, because those teams aren't really going to run away from the Titans. I'm more interested to see how much play action do they stay in and they use. We only have a 1-game sample with Derrick Henry missing time when Ryan Tannehill's been there.
That's crazy.
And in that game they still use play action 32% of the time, and Tannehill was effective with play action because he's so sensitive to play action and non-play action scripts that we want them to be able to stay in those for Ryan Tannehill, and then obviously as a trickle down to Arthur Juan and Julio and the pass catchers. So that's what I'm more looking for in this particular game. I definitely think it sets up to be more of a McNichols script, but he's a guy too. If you are playing him in a non-PPR league, you're gonna need him to get in the box.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And what you're saying too, this might open up a little bit of a buy window for those people that went out, splashed a bunch of fab on Adrian Peterson. They might start getting a little nervous if Jeremy McNichols comes out and gets all those touches this week. So I do think that Adrian Peterson is best suited. I think this is kind of a perfect scenario for him. You're not expecting him to play a full season. He gets to go in and take a full workload for 6 to 10 weeks. I think at his age, that's kind of exactly what you want for Adrian Peterson. I can't imagine a better scenario for him to fall into. But I think there's you can make an argument for either side. And Tommy, I'll throw this question to you. With Derrick Henry being gone, do you think that is positive or negative news for AJ Brown? How does this affect him?
Yeah, I only think it's negative if they can't get the running game going. Again, with McNichols and AD. Even to your question to Rich about who to start, I completely agree with the reasons why McNichols is the better person to start. But I feel like AD is the kind of guy that's just going to come in and put up 150 or something, like we did with Washington, just show up off the street and completely destroy everybody and, put up 30 points for fantasy. He just has that potential, but I think it's still going to be good for Brown. but I guess at the same time it's tough because Derrick Henry was facing the 8 men in the box more than anyone else in the entire NFL. It was like 35% of the time. I think the next
Didn't matter.
closest is Jonathan Taylor at like 25%. So he's seeing 8 defenders in the box, stack boxes all the time. So obviously without him there, teams can run cover two
Mhm.
man, two high shell, with the two safeties high, and give a little bit more support to their cornerbacks trying to cover AJ Brown. So there will be some struggle there, with just matching up against the scheme. The defensive scheme is going to be a little bit easier for the other teams because they don't have to put all their guys to stop Derrick Henry. So obviously that alone is going to make it a little bit tougher for AJ Brown, but at the same time, AJ Brown's great and he's phenomenal. And if they can, like I said at the beginning, if he can get the running game going with these replacements, I think he'll be fine. But
Yeah.
the game plan to plan for it is definitely going to be so different now.
Yeah. And I feel like you get so many of those big plays from AJ Brown because there is a loaded box, and then he catches the
Yeah,
ball, he breaks one tackle, and then he's got nothing but green
it's
ahead of him.
gone.
So yeah, then being able to play, some safeties further back, not having to load the box, could negatively impact him. But you're also going to be looking at some additional usage here, so it's tough to kind of determine how this is going to shake out. But what you said at the end, AJ Brown's a great football player, and I think at the end of the day, you can bet on AJ Brown's talent to persevere in this situation.
Right.
Um, Two more things I want to talk about in this game, and one of them is Robert Woods and Van Jefferson. Both of these guys have been, pretty unpredictable so far this season. I think that Van Jefferson is going to see an increased role now with Deshaun Jackson gone. I'm hoping that Van Jefferson can take some of that deep threat, some of those routes. Um, Rich, what are you thinking here? I mean, is Robert Woods trending back up into that wide receiver 2 territory, or is Van Jefferson somebody that you're getting a little bit more excited about as his role in the offense increases?
Well, I mean, you're definitely excited about Van Jefferson just in terms of his playing time in the past 2 weeks. Ran a pass around 95% and 89% of the team dropbacks on one of the best offenses in the NFL.
Yep.
So you definitely feel good about that. And then the opportunity that Van Jefferson would present if one of these players in Cooper Kupp or Robert Woods were to be injured or miss time, the elevation he would have. So he would be someone I would be definitely looking to have on rosters for like a plug and play flex on an elite offense, or the upside injury element of what he could run into down the line. Robert Woods has basically read like a tale of two seasons in the front half. He ran really cold to start, and now he's running a little bit over expectation. He still has fewer than 50 yards receiving in 5 of his 8 games. But we see the team elevation that we talk about, the attachment. I mean, he's got a touchdown, in 4 of his past 5 games. He even had rushing attempts. Remember, he had dried up. We used to always count on a rushing attempt a game for Robert Woods. He finally had 3 rushing attempts last week after he didn't carry the ball since week 3. So although he's run a little bit hot, versus from running cold in the season, I mean, you look at this matchup against the Titans, I don't really see how you come off of any really pass catcher and not really wanting to not play them in this matchup.
Yeah, and that's I think it's just a smash play for all the receivers in this game. But let's go and talk about the game that we are going to be watching in just a few hours here. That's why I love doing the show on Thursdays, because we get to wrap up talking about the game that is coming right up. And I'll start with you, Rich. Michael Pittman he's currently the wide receiver 11 in PPR scoring through week 8. I mean, he has just been exceeding expectations. He has looked like a locked and loaded wide receiver 1. So over under this week at wide receiver 11, where do you expect Michael Pittman to finish?
Probably right around there. I'm trying to think of where I have him. I don't have my rankings pulled up, but I have him right on the fringe there. It's interesting. So what kind of game script are we going to get? It's what the Jet season has always been. Right? I keep bringing up game script because it's so pivotal on a week to week basis, on how these games go. Because you look at the Jets, they've faced just 17.7 targets per game to opposing wide receivers because they've trailed by double-digit points by more than at the highest rate in the NFL. So, I mean, but when you look on a per play basis, they're also not good at defending the pass. So, it's one of those things like, are the Colts going to get ahead and they can just ride Jonathan Taylor out in the second half, and then Pittman has a game where he falls on the spectrum where he has 6 to 8 targets, or is it be a game that's competitive back and forth, and he can end up getting 8 to 12 targets, something like that, because that's how you crash the ceiling and you're not relying on just a touchdown. Pittman's run a pass route at the highest rate of team dropbacks of any wide receiver in the NFL, 98%. We see him, the red zone targets have been there. The spike targets have been there. So the opportunities there, I think, where he is there, just like a fringe wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 option. And you hope the game script just kind of falls in the favor of, the Colts still having to, be pressed and throw the football for 4 quarters.
Yeah, and I think, we're hoping for what we saw last week, which was him just finding the end zone twice right off the bat, because they probably aren't gonna be throwing too much in the second half unless this game just goes completely off the rails and the Jets are somehow able to stay in it. But let me ask you, Tommy, one of the reasons that we've seen Michael Pittman play well is because Carson Wentz has rewound the clock, and he has looked very great for the last few weeks. Is Carson Wentz somebody that you should be comfortable starting in a single QB league? Is he in your top 12 to 15 rankings?
Yeah, he's like right there, like fringe quarterback one, quarterback two right now. But he's developed a safe weekly floor this year. It's like roughly around like 25 points a week. And then so yeah, I think it's comfortable enough where you could trust him. But I don't necessarily think he's going to win you anything, any championships. I don't think he's a league winner, but I think he's nice and safe. He's kind of like Kirk Cousins a year or two ago, where you could just like kind of trust him at this point, which I think for Carson Wentz for this year is actually a big plus, because I think a lot of people were down on him coming into this year. So seeing him perform where he's at, I mean, it's a solid quarterback two. I'd be really happy in a super flex league if he was my quarterback two. I'd feel really safe starting him, knowing that I was going to get roughly 20 something points. I didn't have to worry about, a bunch of interceptions or no touchdowns or anything like that. And especially with Michael Pittman, turning it on lately, it's all looking better for him. And, Jonathan Taylor running like he does makes it, opens up the passing game a little bit more too. So I'm really comfortable now with Carson Wentz compared to at the beginning of the season, or even in the offseason, if you would ask me. But like I said, he's that unsexy player. He's
Yep.
going to get you the points that you need. He's going to keep you in the game, but he's not necessarily going to win you anything. He's not putting up points like, Tom Brady, where this year's crazy, but he's not getting, those multiple 30, 40 yard point games. So I like him, but it's with tempered expectations on that.
Yeah, I mean, who'd have thought that snagging Carson Wentz and Michael Pittman in the 11th and 12th round was like the best stack that you can get value-wise this offseason in best ball?
Yeah.
But hey, that's how it's working out. All right, last question I have is about Michael Carter, and I just want to ask both of you this. He's averaging 24.5 opportunities per game over the last 2 weeks. Is that level of usage sustainable, and how many touches are you projecting for him tonight? Tommy, go first. How many touches are you expecting Michael Carter to get tonight?
I'd say 20 is a safe spot. He's had, I think, the last 2 weeks has been 19 and 24, 23 targets total the last 2 weeks. So that's amazing too. So I think, I think that's sustainable. I think this is the guy that they've been looking for. And it's the guy that a lot of people, I don't think, thought that Michael Carter was, unless you listen to certain people or really tuned in. I had Jay Moyer on my podcast in the offseason, and he loves Michael Carter. I mean, that was his number one prospect. So I had a lot of information coming at me about Michael Carter. And I think it's absolutely right. And I think we're starting to see it. And I think the Jets should start to lean on him a little bit more, especially because, Zach Wilson, besides being hurt, isn't, really turning out to be that guy yet. And so, especially with a new quarterback in there, I think, it needs to be sustainable. I think his workload can handle it. I think he's that kind of player, but they need to lean on him a bit more and keep giving him these targets in the passing game as well.
Yeah, and we've talked about game script. This is likely going to be a game script that does favor Michael Carter in the passing game. So, Rich, how many touches or opportunities are you projecting for Michael Carter in tonight's matchup?
I mean, I have him for 18 just because, the projections are going to be a little more pragmatic. It's hard to just pencil in a running back for a 30% target share. And that's what he's had. He's had 29% of the team targets from Mike White. You would say like the team would eventually get religion and say we have to throw the football to our wide receivers more. But it's also actually helped the Jets a little bit. And you've seen Mike White. You just don't have the mistakes and you're able to sustain drives. I mean, Zach Wilson's problem the first half of the season was just volatility. The Jets aren't able to hold on to the football and they kept making mistakes. I'm curious to see how the Colts approach things because, they're a zone-based defense and, the Patriots put the heat on Mike White and he threw a ton. He was awful against the blitz. And then the Bengals only blitzed 8 times last week.
Yep.
And I'm curious to see how the Colts approach things in this matchup tonight to see how things go. But I would be excited, especially in full point PPR leagues, to just have like a real safe floor, and then just kind of you just take the opportunities that come along with that, and you hope that you get a touchdown, and you stack some receptions. So I'd feel real good about starting him. The Colts are number 1 in the NFL in EPA against the run. But they've only faced like one decent receiving back so far in the season, and it was Myles Gaskin. So it's really tough to judge like how good they are against the pass. And if you're going to sit back in zones, you're just going to take those checkdowns anyways. So I mean, yeah, I think he's a nice safe floor high guy. You would love him more in a PPR league than not, but I think you're getting safe usage and safe amount of touches. And that's all we can hope for at the running back position in week 9.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. If you got a guy that, on the low end is going to be getting, 18 touches or so, that's definitely somebody you want. But like you said, I mean, Mike White is kind of posed for another big week now. Just his style of play and the Colts with their bend don't break defense. It seems like he could really, just carve them up again with the short to intermediate throws. So I think Indianapolis is really going to have to change up their identity and load up the box and not be afraid to put some pressure on Mike White tonight. But we will see how that game goes in just a few hours. I want to thank both of you so much for the time today. I apologize for going a few minutes over, but the conversation was good, and sometimes it just flows like that. Before we sign off, Rich, go ahead one more time. Let everyone know where they can find all of your content, where they can find you on social media, and what you've got going on over the next few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, all the content is up at sharpfootballanalysis.com, the weekly worksheet, DFS articles, hanging out with subscribers. You can find me on multiple podcasts regularly every week. I do the Pick Six show on Roto Grinders every Wednesday night with John Daigle and Dean. I do a kind of more real football based show with my buddy Dan Pizzuta, and I do a Sharp Angles fantasy football podcast where I bring people on with that as well. So you can find me on all those shows throughout the week.
I'm a big fan of John Daigle, but the problem is he records at this exact time on Thursday every afternoon. So we have not been able to link up yet, but I think sometime before the season's over, I'll push a couple hours so I can get him on.
He does 32 podcasts a week, so it's tough to fit him in.
That man just lives in front of a microphone. It is unbelievable to see. Tommy, let everyone know where they can find you, where your written content is published, and what shows you've got as well.
Yeah, I'm like that exact opposite during the season. I like to write and just make videos, and because I love doing this, I love coming on as a guest and talking to you guys and talking football with other people. But doing my own show during the season, it just became so tough. So writing a lot more. Just put out 2 trade articles at theundroppables.com. Like I said, a weekly defensive game plan article for the Rams at downtownrams.com. And then you can find me on almost all social media platforms at 2on1FFB or at 2on1Tommy. Especially my weekly TikTok Tuesdays where I just dancing like a fool to get some waiver wire content out there. Whatever makes the people laugh and get views, I'll I'll shake my ass and do whatever I need to do.
One of the main reasons I haven't joined TikTok yet is because I know I can't compete with the content that Tommy's putting out. It's just not even fair. I mean, you're killing it in the TikTok game. But want to thank everybody for tuning in. Want to thank both of you for making the time to join me on the show today. I'll be back next week for episode 23 with Dwayne McFarland and Alex Caruso as we talk about some week 10 matchups. So be sure to tune into that. I will